December 25, 1989, while families across Europe celebrated Christmas morning, in a military barracks courtyard in Romania, the most controversial execution of the 20th century was about to unfold. The world watched grainy footage of Nicolae Ceaușescu and his wife Elena facing a firing squad. But what they saw was only the surface of a story far more complex and disturbing than anyone imagined. Behind the scenes of this dramatic finale lay secrets that the new Romanian government desperately wanted to keep hidden. The trial that lasted less than an hour, the defense lawyers who demanded their client's execution, and the mysterious circumstances that still puzzle historians today. These are the shocking truths they never told you about Nicolae Ceaușescu's final hours. The story of Ceaușescu's downfall begins not with the execution, but with a helicopter flight that would become one of history's most significant acts of betrayal. On December 22, 1989, as crowds stormed the Central Committee building in Bucharest, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu rushed to the roof where their personal helicopter waited. What happened next would determine not just their fate, but the entire course of the Romanian Revolution. Vasile Maluțan, the helicopter pilot who had served the Ceaușescu regime loyally for years, was faced with the most important decision of his life. As the aircraft lifted off from the roof, Ceaușescu believed he was escaping to safety, perhaps to a loyal military base, or even out of the country entirely. But Maluțan had other plans that would soon become devastatingly clear. The pilot initially flew towards Snagov, where the Ceaușescus maintained a luxurious residence complete with underground bunkers and communication facilities. This should have been their sanctuary, a place where they could regroup and potentially organize a counterattack against the revolutionary forces. But as they approached the familiar landmark, something fundamental had changed in Maluțan's allegiance. The pilot later claimed he was warned about anti-aircraft fire threatening their approach, but many historians believe this was the first of several calculated lies told that day. The reality was far more sinister. Maluțan had already decided to abandon his former master, possibly after receiving communications from revolutionary forces, or realizing that his own survival depended on switching sides. When the helicopter touched down on the Bucharest-Târgoviște road near Gaști, it marked the beginning of the most surreal chase in modern European history. The most powerful man in Romania, who just hours earlier had commanded absolute authority over 23 million people, was suddenly reduced to a desperate fugitive, frantically trying to flag down cars on a country road. The first driver who stopped, Nicolae Deca, would later claim he had no idea who he was helping when he saw two elderly people seeking assistance. But his subsequent actions suggest otherwise. Instead of taking the couple to safety, as they requested, he drove them toward Bucharest and immediately informed local authorities of their whereabouts. This decision transforms what appeared to be a chance encounter into something far more calculated. The pattern of apparent assistance followed by betrayal would repeat throughout this nightmarish day. A second driver, Nicolae Petrișor, agreed to take them to Târgoviște, seemingly offering the help they desperately needed. But he too made a crucial decision that sealed their fate. Instead of dropping them at a secure location where they might have found genuine sanctuary, he brought them directly to an agricultural center where they could easily be trapped and captured. During this journey, the Ceaușescus heard news of the revolution on the car radio. The very media outlets that had served as their propaganda machine for decades were now announcing their downfall with what must have seemed like gleeful satisfaction. The psychological impact of hearing their own destruction broadcast through the apparatus they had controlled for so long cannot be underestimated. The speed and coordination of these betrayals raises disturbing questions about how spontaneous the Romanian Revolution really was. Were these ordinary citizens making split-second decisions to turn against their former leader in a moment of revolutionary fervor? Or was a more complex plan already in motion, with various participants playing predetermined roles in a carefully orchestrated drama? But the helicopter pilot's betrayal would prove to be just the beginning of deceptions that would culminate in one of the most controversial legal proceedings in modern history. When Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were finally captured and brought to the Târgoviște military garrison, they entered what would become one of the most controversial legal proceedings of the modern era. What the world was told was a military tribunal dispensing swift justice was actually something far more sinister. A predetermined execution masked as due process, orchestrated with a level of cynicism that still shocks legal scholars today. The trial was scheduled for Christmas Day, December 25, 1989, but the decision to execute the Ceaușescus had already been made during a secret meeting the night before. Victor Stanculescu, who had served as Ceaușescu's defense minister for years before switching sides at the crucial moment, sent a coded message to the garrison commander that would seal their fate. The message contained the phrase, "recourse to the method," which was military code for immediate execution, revealing that the upcoming trial was merely elaborate theater designed to provide a veneer of legitimacy for a predetermined political assassination. General Andrei Kemenici, the garrison commander who held the Ceaușescus in custody, later revealed the impossible position he was placed in during those tense hours. Despite having taken an oath to protect the Romanian leadership and having been prepared to defend them with his life just days earlier, he was now receiving direct orders from the new revolutionary leadership to ensure they never left the barracks alive. The pressure on Kemenici was immense and came from multiple sources. Ion Iliescu, Romania's provisional president, publicly supported holding a trial to maintain the appearance of legal propriety. But privately, very different messages were being sent through military channels. The coded communications made it clear that regardless of what happened during the trial proceedings, the outcome had already been decided by political authorities who were determined to eliminate any possibility of the Ceaușescus becoming martyrs. When the trial finally began at around 2 p.m. on Christmas Day, the proceedings immediately took on a surreal quality that revealed their predetermined nature to anyone with legal training. The courtroom was hastily arranged in a small office within the military compound, with cameras positioned to create the impression of legitimate legal proceedings for both domestic and international consumption. The physical setup itself was telling. There was no proper dock for the defendants, no jury box, no gallery for observers, and no facilities for legal consultation between the defendants and their attorneys. These absences were not merely practical oversights, but deliberate choices designed to prevent any delay or complication that might interfere with the predetermined outcome. The panel of judges was led by military judge Ghica Popa, a career officer who had been carefully selected for his reliability rather than his legal expertise. From his opening statements, Popa made it clear that this was an exceptional tribunal operating under emergency powers, but he failed to explain the legal basis for such powers or how they related to existing Romanian constitutional law. The prosecution, led by military prosecutors who had been given less than 24 hours to prepare their case, presented charges of genocide, claiming Ceaușescu was personally responsible for the deaths of 60,000 Romanian citizens. However, they provided no evidence, called no witnesses, and presented no documentation to support these extraordinary claims. In any legitimate legal system, such a prosecution would have been immediately dismissed for lack of evidence. Even more shocking was the behavior of the court-appointed defense attorneys, Nicolae Teodorescu and Constantin Lucescu. Both were experienced lawyers who understood their professional and ethical obligations, yet they abandoned every principle of legal advocacy. Instead of defending their clients, challenging the evidence, or questioning the tribunal's jurisdiction, both attorneys actively argued for the Ceaușescu's execution. Teodorescu's performance was particularly extraordinary. Standing before the tribunal, he declared that after reviewing the charges against his clients, he found them guilty of all counts and recommended they be sentenced to death. This unprecedented act, a defense attorney arguing for his own client's execution, exposed the entire proceeding as elaborate theater designed to create the appearance of justice while ensuring a predetermined outcome. The Ceaușescus themselves seemed to grasp the futility of their situation almost immediately. Nicolae, despite his many flaws, had received legal training in his youth and possessed enough understanding of legal procedure to recognize that what was happening bore no resemblance to legitimate legal proceedings. He repeatedly declared that he would only answer to the Great National Assembly, Romania's constitutional parliament, and refused to recognize the tribunal's authority to try him. Elena Ceaușescu, often portrayed in Western media as merely her husband's accomplice, proved surprisingly defiant during the proceedings. She challenged the judge's authority and questioned the legitimacy of the charges with an understanding of legal procedure that contrasted sharply with the kangaroo court atmosphere that pervaded the room. The entire trial lasted less than 1 hour from opening statements to final judgment. Judge Popa delivered the death sentence after only minutes of deliberation, without consulting his fellow judges or reviewing any evidence. There was no jury deliberation, no appeal process, and no time for the defendants to mount any meaningful defense. The immediate implementation of the death sentence without any of the safeguards typically required in capital cases revealed the true nature of the proceedings. In legitimate legal systems, death sentences require extensive review processes, appeals procedures, and waiting periods designed to ensure that irreversible punishments are only carried out after careful consideration. None of these safeguards were present in the Ceaușescu case. What emerges from examining the trial records and testimony from participants is a picture of a legal proceeding designed not to determine guilt or innocence, but to provide international legitimacy for a predetermined execution. But the most disturbing secrets were yet to be revealed in the execution itself. The actual execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu involved secrets and contradictions that the Romanian government tried desperately to conceal from both domestic and international audiences. The firing squad that carried out the death sentence consisted of 8 paratroopers from the 64th Regiment, brought in by helicopter from the Botany base specifically for this mission. These were not volunteers randomly selected from available personnel, but carefully chosen soldiers whose loyalty to the new regime had already been established and tested. Captain Ionel Boeru, Sergeant Major Jorgen Octavian, and Petty Officer Doran Marian Curlin were among the soldiers who carried out what they were told was a crucial mission for the new Romania. But their subsequent accounts of what happened in that military courtyard reveal disturbing details that contradict the sanitized official narrative and expose the chaotic, emotionally charged reality of state-sanctioned execution. According to Doran Serlan, who later provided the most detailed public account of the execution, the final moments were far more psychologically complex and emotionally devastating than the clinical version released to international media. As the couple was led from the improvised courtroom to the execution wall, something unexpected happened that none of the soldiers had been prepared for. Ceaușescu looked directly at his former bodyguards, some of whom were now among the execution squad, and his composure finally cracked. The man who had maintained an imperious demeanor throughout the trial proceedings suddenly began crying, not from fear, but from what appeared to be profound betrayal and disappointment at seeing men he had trusted with his life now preparing to end it. His final words, according to Serlan's account, were not the defiant political statements reported in most official versions, but a deeply personal expression of his sense of betrayal. He declared that traitors surrounded him, and that history would eventually vindicate his actions and punish those who had betrayed Romania's independence. These were not the words of a man accepting defeat, but of someone still believing in the righteousness of his cause. Even more revealing was Ceaușescu's decision to sing the Internationale, the communist anthem, in his final moments before the rifles were raised. This detail was deliberately omitted from most media accounts because it presented the uncomfortable image of a man facing death while still believing in the ideology that had defined his life. Rather than showing a defeated dictator accepting his fate, it portrayed someone who maintained his convictions even in the face of execution. Elena Ceaușescu's final moments were equally problematic for the official narrative. Her last words were not dignified or philosophical, but raw expressions of anger and desperation directed at her executioners. She screamed profanities and accusations at the soldiers, showing a very human figure facing death rather than the cold, calculating political figure that propaganda had portrayed for decades. The most disturbing aspect of the execution was its timing and manner, which revealed the authorities' deep anxiety about the proceedings. The soldiers received orders to begin firing as soon as the couple was positioned against the wall, giving them no opportunity for final statements, prayer, or even basic human dignity in their last moments. This haste was not about military efficiency. It was about preventing any possibility of last-minute complications, dramatic final statements, or scenes that might generate sympathy for the victims. The immediate aftermath of the shooting revealed the extent of the authorities' paranoia about the execution. The bodies were quickly covered with canvas and hastily photographed for official records, but the soldiers received orders to continue firing even after it was clearly evident that both victims were dead. This excessive response suggested a deep-seated fear that somehow the Ceaușescus might survive and return to haunt their executioners. The psychological impact on the execution squad was severe and long-lasting, though this was carefully concealed from public view. Several of the soldiers later reported experiencing nightmares, depression, and moral anguish about their role in the killings. These reactions were particularly intense because many had previously served in units responsible for protecting the Ceaușescus, creating a profound sense of betrayal and moral confusion. Cirlan, who had served in an elite regiment specifically tasked with protecting Romania's leadership, later described the execution as one of the most difficult experiences of his military career. He spoke of struggling with the moral implications of killing prisoners, even despised ones, and of the lasting psychological scars left by participating in what he gradually came to understand was a legally questionable proceeding. The Romanian government initially portrayed the executioners as heroes who had helped liberate the country from tyranny, but this public recognition came at a steep personal cost. The soldiers found themselves forever associated with one of the most controversial events in Romanian history, unable to escape the notoriety and moral complexity that came with their role in the execution. But the secrets surrounding the execution were only part of a much larger conspiracy that would soon be exposed through shocking accusations made by Ceaușescu himself. During the chaotic trial proceedings, Nicolae Ceaușescu made a startling accusation that has haunted historians and conspiracy theorists ever since. He claimed that his overthrow was the result of a joint American-Soviet operation designed to remove him from power. While many observers dismiss this as the desperate ravings of a doomed dictator, evidence that has emerged in the decades since suggests that Ceaușescu's claims may have contained considerably more truth than his executioners wanted to admit. Ceaușescu's assertion that Americans and Russians had worked together to orchestrate his downfall seemed almost absurd in the context of the Cold War, when the two superpowers were supposed to be bitter ideological enemies engaged in a global struggle for dominance. But by 1989, the geopolitical landscape was changing rapidly, and there were compelling strategic reasons why both Moscow and Washington might have wanted to see the Romanian dictator removed from the chessboard of international politics. From the Soviet perspective, Ceaușescu had become an increasingly problematic ally who consistently refused to follow Moscow's lead on key policy issues that affected the entire Warsaw Pact alliance. Unlike other Eastern European leaders who maintained careful deference to Soviet authority and coordinated their policies with Moscow's strategic objectives, Ceaușescu had pursued an aggressively independent foreign policy that often directly contradicted Soviet interests and undermined bloc solidarity. His refusal to participate in the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia had been a major embarrassment for Moscow, depriving the operation of legitimacy and providing international critics with evidence that the Warsaw Pact was not the voluntary alliance that Soviet propaganda claimed. His subsequent criticism of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had further damaged Soviet prestige and provided ammunition for Western critics of Soviet foreign policy. By 1989, as Mikhail Gorbachev was attempting to reform the Soviet system through glasnost and perestroika, while simultaneously improving relations with the West, Ceaușescu's rigid authoritarianism and spectacular economic mismanagement were becoming serious liabilities for the entire communist movement. His brutal suppression of dissent, his megalomaniacal building projects that devastated Bucharest's historic center, and his cult of personality were creating negative international publicity for the entire communist bloc. The Romanian leader's economic policies were particularly embarrassing to Soviet reformers, who were trying to demonstrate that communist systems could adapt and modernize. Ceaușescu's decision to export most of Romania's agricultural and industrial production to pay off foreign debts, while his people endured severe shortages of food, fuel, and basic necessities, created a humanitarian crisis that contradicted everything Gorbachev was trying to achieve through his reform program. From the American perspective, Ceaușescu presented a different, but equally compelling set of problems. During the height of the Cold War in the 1960s and 1970s, the United States had actually cultivated close relationships with the Romanian dictator precisely because of his independence from Moscow. Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter had all welcomed Ceaușescu to the White House with considerable fanfare, seeing him as a potential wedge between the Soviet Union and its satellite states. This relationship had produced some genuine strategic benefits for American foreign policy. Romania had maintained diplomatic relations with Israel throughout the Arab-Israeli conflicts, had refused to break ties with China during the Sino-Soviet split, and had generally pursued policies that complicated Soviet strategic planning in Eastern Europe. American intelligence agencies had developed working relationships with Romanian counterparts, and there had been various forms of economic and technological cooperation. But by the late 1980s, this relationship had become a serious political liability for American policymakers. Ceaușescu's human rights abuses were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, as Romanian dissidents and refugees brought international attention to the regime's brutality. His erratic behavior and increasingly bizarre policies were making him an unreliable partner, whose continued association with American interests was damaging to U.S. credibility on human rights issues. The timing and nature of the Romanian Revolution also raises suspicious questions about potential foreign involvement that distinguish it from other Eastern European transitions of 1989. While revolutions were indeed sweeping across Eastern Europe throughout that remarkable year, the Romanian uprising was notably different in both its extreme violence and its ultimate outcome. Other communist governments fell through negotiated transitions, round-table discussions, and peaceful transfers of power, while Romania experienced a bloody confrontation that ended with the summary execution of its leadership. The rapid formation of the National Salvation Front as a governing body, the immediate international recognition of the new government by both superpowers, and the presence of foreign journalists who seemed remarkably well prepared to cover the unfolding events all suggest a level of advanced planning and international coordination that would have been impossible without some form of external involvement or at least foreknowledge. Ion Iliescu, who emerged as Romania's new leader almost immediately after Ceaușescu's flight, had been educated in Moscow during the 1950s and had maintained relationships with Soviet officials even during his years of political disfavor under Ceaușescu. His rapid assumption of power and his immediate recognition by Moscow suggest that Soviet authorities were comfortable with his leadership and may have had advanced knowledge of his likely role in post-Ceaușescu Romania. The immediate international response to Ceaușescu's execution also suggests some form of advanced coordination between major powers. Both the United States and Soviet Union moved with remarkable speed to recognize the new Romanian government and offer various forms of economic and political support, despite serious questions about the new regime's democratic legitimacy and its role in the summary execution of the previous leadership. While definitive documentary proof of a joint American-Soviet operation to remove Ceaușescu remains elusive, the circumstantial evidence is compelling enough to suggest that his accusations about foreign involvement contained at least some elements of truth. But even more shocking secrets were yet to be revealed, beginning with the mysterious circumstances surrounding the burial of Romania's executed leaders. The mystery of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu's final resting place reveals perhaps the most bizarre and psychologically revealing chapter in the aftermath of their execution. What should have been a straightforward burial became a decades-long conspiracy of secrecy, deception, and paranoid control that exposed the new Romanian government's deep fears about their predecessor's potential to inspire continuing loyalty and opposition, even in death. The bodies of the executed couple were initially transported from the Târgoviște barracks to Bucharest on December 30th, 1989, but their burial in Ghencea Military Cemetery was conducted under circumstances so secretive and rushed that it immediately sparked suspicions about the authorities' true intentions. The location within the sprawling cemetery was kept completely secret from both the Romanian public and the international community, with no markers, headstones, or any other indication of the grave's presence. This extraordinary level of secrecy was unprecedented in modern European history. Even the most reviled dictators and war criminals had typically been buried with some form of public acknowledgement of their final resting places. The Romanian authorities' decision to conduct a completely clandestine burial suggested a level of paranoia about the Ceaușescu's posthumous influence that bordered on the irrational. The secrecy immediately spawned a cottage industry of conspiracy theories that would persist and grow for over 2 decades. Many Romanians, particularly those who retained some sympathy for the former regime's nationalist policies, began to suspect that the graves were empty, that the bodies had been secretly cremated to prevent any form of martyrdom, or that they had been moved to undisclosed locations to prevent the burial site from becoming a pilgrimage destination for supporters. These suspicions were not entirely paranoid, given the Romanian government's track record of deception regarding the revolutionary events. The same authorities who had staged a show trial, manipulated media coverage, and concealed crucial evidence about the execution were now claiming that they had buried the bodies in unmarked graves for reasons of public safety and social stability. The conspiracy theories that emerged ranged from the relatively plausible to the utterly fantastical, but all reflected a deep distrust of official narratives that had been fostered by years of communist propaganda, followed by the obvious deceptions surrounding the revolutionary period. Some theories suggested that loyal Securitate agents had managed to switch the bodies with those of anonymous victims, allowing the real Ceaușescus to be buried with dignity in secret locations, known only to a few trusted supporters. More elaborate theories claimed that the couple had been cremated immediately after the execution, with anonymous bodies from morgues or hospitals buried in their place to maintain the fiction that they had received proper burial. These theories were given credence by the authorities' absolute refusal to provide any details about the burial location, or to allow any form of independent verification of the graves. The most extreme conspiracy theories, which attracted surprisingly widespread belief, suggested that the Ceaușescus had somehow escaped execution entirely. According to these accounts, the filmed deaths had been staged using body doubles, with the real couple spirited away to exile in friendly countries or hidden in underground facilities by loyal supporters. While these claims were clearly impossible, given the circumstances and the testimony of multiple witnesses, their persistence revealed the extent to which many Romanians had lost faith in any official accounts of the revolutionary events. The situation became so contentious and legally complex that members of the Ceaușescu family were eventually forced to file a formal lawsuit demanding access to the burial site and definitive proof that their relatives were actually interred there. This extraordinary legal action, which dragged on for 5 years through various levels of the Romanian court system, revealed the extent to which even the victims' own family members had come to doubt the official account of what had happened to the bodies. In 2010, more than 20 years after the execution, Romanian authorities finally agreed to take the extraordinary step of exhuming the bodies for DNA testing to definitively prove their identity. This decision, to exhume a former head of state for identification purposes, was virtually unprecedented in modern European history and revealed the depth of the conspiracy theories and public suspicion that had built up around the secret burial. The exhumation itself was conducted under extraordinary security measures that seemed designed more to prevent scrutiny than to facilitate scientific investigation. The cemetery was completely closed to the public. Journalists were barred from witnessing any part of the proceedings, and even family members were excluded from observing the process. The DNA testing results, when they were finally released, confirmed that the bodies buried in unmarked graves at Ghencea Cemetery were indeed those of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. This scientific verification finally put to rest decades of speculation about empty graves, switched bodies, or elaborate deception schemes. However, the very fact that such testing had been necessary revealed the extent to which the Romanian government's secretive and paranoid handling of the burial had completely undermined public trust and credibility. But the burial mystery was just one part of a much larger pattern of secrecy and deception that continues to shape Romanian politics and society to this day. More than 3 decades after the execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, the Romanian government continues to maintain an impenetrable wall of secrecy around many crucial aspects of the December 1989 events. This ongoing cover-up involves not just the passive concealment of historical documents in dusty archives, but active, systematic efforts to prevent independent investigation, to discredit researchers who challenge the official narrative, and to maintain control over how these events are understood and remembered. Key government archives related to the revolutionary period remain either completely classified or so heavily redacted as to be virtually useless for historical research. documents that could potentially shed light on the role of foreign intelligence services, the predetermined nature of the Ceaușescu trial, the true extent of casualties during the revolutionary period, or the decision-making processes within the National Salvation Front, are kept under the strictest security classifications by Romanian authorities. What makes this continued secrecy particularly suspicious is that similar documents from other Eastern European revolutions of 1989 have long since been declassified and made available for scholarly research and public examination. Countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic have opened their communist-era archives and allowed historians to examine the complex processes by which their transitions from communist rule occurred. Romania remains a glaring exception to this pattern of transparency. The fact that Romania continues to maintain such strict classification of documents related to events from over 30 years ago strongly suggests that these materials contain information that current political authorities still consider too sensitive or politically dangerous for public consumption. This level of ongoing secrecy implies that the documents might reveal embarrassing details about foreign involvement, institutional continuities between the communist and post-communist periods, or other facts that would undermine the heroic narrative of popular revolution. Independent researchers and investigative journalists who have attempted to obtain access to classified materials through legal channels have been consistently blocked by Romanian courts and administrative agencies. Freedom of information requests related to the revolutionary period are routinely denied on grounds of national security, even when the requested materials would appear to pose no conceivable threat to current Romanian interests or international relations. The Romanian government has also worked systematically to control public understanding of the revolutionary period through official commemorations, educational curricula, and cultural productions that present a carefully sanitized version of events. School textbooks and official histories consistently emphasize the heroic aspects of the popular uprising, while glossing over or completely ignoring the serious legal and ethical problems with the Ceaușescu trial and execution. International pressure for greater transparency about the Romanian revolutionary period has been remarkably minimal, partly because major Western powers have their own reasons for preferring that certain aspects of the story remain hidden from public scrutiny. The potential revelation of foreign involvement in orchestrating or facilitating the Romanian Revolution could prove deeply embarrassing for governments that have built their historical reputations on publicly supporting human rights and democratic principles. The continuing cover-up has had profoundly corrosive effects on Romanian democratic culture and civil society that extend far beyond questions of historical accuracy. The government's obvious refusal to provide honest, complete information about such a crucial period in the country's recent history has fostered a pervasive climate of cynicism and distrust that undermines public confidence in democratic institutions and processes. Opinion polls consistently show that large majorities of Romanian citizens suspect their current leaders are hiding important truths about the communist transition. This widespread suspicion makes it extremely difficult to build the social trust essential for effective democratic governance. Recent developments have only intensified the cover-up. In 2019, Ion Iliescu, who led Romania during the revolutionary period, was finally charged with crimes against humanity related to protester deaths. However, these charges were carefully limited and didn't address broader questions historians have raised for decades. The criminal proceedings actually provided authorities with new justification for maintaining secrecy. Officials now claim that releasing materials could prejudice the legal case, potentially undermining prosecution or violating defendant rights. Today's cover-up represents far more than historical secrecy. It's an ongoing obstacle to Romanian democratic development and a source of social division. The systematic refusal to provide honest information perpetuates the climate of suspicion and institutional distrust that has characterized Romanian politics since 1989. The execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu on Christmas Day 1989 was presented to the world as the dramatic finale of a popular revolution against communist tyranny. But as we have seen, the reality was far more complex and disturbing than the official narrative suggests. Behind the scenes of this historic event lay a web of conspiracy, manipulation, and cover-up that continues to this day. The evidence reveals a predetermined execution disguised as legal justice, defense attorneys who argued for their clients' deaths, and international coordination that suggests the revolution was as much a staged political transition as a genuine popular uprising. The helicopter pilot's calculated betrayal, the sham trial with its predetermined outcome, the executioner's later guilt and confessions, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the burial all point to a story that is fundamentally different from the heroic narrative that has dominated historical accounts. The American-Soviet conspiracy theory, while not definitively proven, gains credibility when viewed alongside the other evidence of international coordination and advanced planning. The decades-long cover-up of crucial documents and the Romanian government's continued refusal to allow independent investigation of these events only strengthens the case that there are still secrets being hidden from public view. The psychological toll on the executioners, the decades-long burial mystery that required DNA testing to resolve, and the continuing secrecy surrounding these events demonstrate that the principles of transparency and accountability that supposedly motivated the revolution remain unfulfilled. The new Romania that emerged from the chaos of December 1989 has proven to be just as willing to manipulate truth and conceal inconvenient facts as the communist regime it replaced. The story of Nicolae Ceaușescu's execution serves as a powerful reminder that historical truth is often the first casualty of political expediency. The sanitized version that reached international media concealed a reality far more morally complex than anyone wanted to admit. What's most disturbing is how governments willingly manipulated historical truth to serve their interests. The speed with which edited footage reached Western audiences and the coordinated international response suggest advanced planning and media manipulation that contradicts democratic accountability principles. The hidden secrets continue to cast a shadow over Romanian democracy, proving that the promise of truth and justice from the revolutionary period remains unfulfilled. Until Romanian authorities open their archives and allow independent investigation, questions will surround one of the 20th century's most dramatic political transitions. The real tragedy isn't just the violation of legal principles, but the betrayal of democratic ideals that supposedly motivated the Romanian people's struggle for freedom. The revolution that promised transparency instead created new forms of secrecy that continue undermining democratic institutions today. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.